As a gamer, I have a habit of stumbling upon franchises in the middle, then working my way back to the first games in the series. I did this with Sly 2 way back in my day, with Persona 5, and just the other day, Yakuza 7, which is closely related to the game I'm talking about now. In 2010, I stumbled upon one of my personal favorite games, one of the best open-world crime games ever made, Mafia II. It was published by the same company who makes GTA, and surely possessed the same kind of chaotic, satirical charm, but it had a different overtone rooted in complex drama and tragic characters which are ever present in organized crime stories. It had the glitzy cars and the nostalgic soundtrack, and it presented its story in a way that made it feel very close to a real, interactive mafia movie. I was sold on it being another one of the sequels being better than the original, despite never having played the original. Today I find myself giving credit where credit is due to the original gangster game, Mafia. The definitive edition was handled by Hangar 13, the same small-time studio that remastered the classic Mafia 2 and fucked up the sequel. Here in Mafia Definitive Edition, Hangar 13 finally shows their chops by recreating a highly influential video game with the standard in modern world building, voice acting,
Go get him, Tommy!
physics, and arguably an improved script that seems faithful to the original while also expanding upon various attributes in a way that justifies the remake after nearly 20 years of industry change. In 2002, Mafia was no slouch at all. In fact, Mafia was beloved by all comers as one of the most realistic and compelling games around. Stuck in the shadow of GTA 3 at the time, a fellow 2002 game that is considered by many to be one of the most revolutionary games ever made, for its switch from top-down camera angles to full third-person 3D open world, Mafia was overlooked, despite having many of the same technical features thought to be innovations. Of course, there is an inherent difference in the story structure of a GTA and Mafia. While GTA is more open-ended in its approach to pacing the story and the abundant side missions by letting the player choose the order of continuity, Mafia is very on the rails, transitioning you immediately and automatically from one story chapter to the next, with the possibility of free roam after it's all said and done. The way Mafia does it is great for pacing and continuity, making you feel as though you're playing the main character in a live-action film. The story strings you along and gradually unfolds into darker territory as characters develop and the protagonist's gang ties deepen. Every mission has a unique setting and storyline, even though some gameplay aspects are tedious, like the walking sim sections which could have been sped up a bit like Mafia 2 did. In other words, letting you actually sprint when indoors or having a conversation with an NPC. The shooting, I have always felt, feels a lot more natural than GTA auto-aim, and it feels good here in Mafia Definitive, but it felt better in Mafia 2 because that game was closer in design to Uncharted's fluid over-the-shoulder shooting than the stiff and uneven shooting that many modern games seem to be implementing now for quote-unquote realism. Although I do have a problem with some early missions being too short and seeming a bit redundant with some of the gameplay choices, the game gets a lot more interesting and varied as you go along, and by the end, I felt for Tommy and his buddies as they become fully invested in the life, and like the stock market collapse of the period, end up losing it all. I don't feel like putting one story or group of characters over the other, but both Mafia and Mafia 2 do an excellent job of creating an authentic La Cosa Nostra tale of obligatory violence and unshaky alliances, and especially with the intersection of Tommy, Vito, and Joe's fates, they feel like connected storylines. A lot of the scenes in Mafia Definitive Edition contain some stereotypical language associated with some of these greaseball gangster types, from the standard Italian names to the idiosyncratic expressions.
One of those Wall Street boys.
Don't sass me, Tommy.
And his two sons, they're inching closer. I can hear them cracking their knuckles. They're both 7 feet tall, built like brick shithouses.
What were you carrying?
My dick. I'm just busting your balls.
Well, then let's see what you got, cake eater.
You hear anything about Joey Crackers?
These boys a lesson. Break every bone in their bodies, put them in wheelchairs, bust their faces up so bad even their mothers can't look at them without screaming.
The game is very violent in a visceral way, which is enjoyable from a gameplay perspective, but honestly a bit unsettling when watching how actions unfold, with the Mafia shaking down local shopkeepers for so-called protection money, and the general way the Mafia used to feel as though they could walk over anyone in society that was uninitiated. I'm glad this way of life is largely over in the real world. Everyone involved is better off, and besides, it all makes a better fit as a movie or a video game than being a real-life cautionary tale. One of my early complaints when playing Mafia Definitive was how the game prevents you from getting a good feel for exploration due to the shuttled story experience from one chapter to the next. I understood why this is done the way it is. But even in Mafia II, you could explore optionally in a chapter before going back to your bed to fast forward in time, although there was no true free roam in Mafia II, which there is here. There are not as many explorable buildings in Mafia 1, and money isn't even a mechanic here, which takes away a lot of the RPG elements that made Mafia 2 feel like a complete experience. The world of Lost Heaven is still detailed and atmospheric, and the cars are some of the nicest outside of a game not named GTA, although I couldn't tell you what songs came on the radio in Mafia 1, apart from the Heart and Soul, and some interesting historical archives from the period. Also, unlike GTA, there are difficulty settings which can make the game even more realistic on classic mode, a real pain in the ass that makes dying happen almost automatically if you're not extremely methodical. And the driving is almost unbearable due to the decreased handling, especially during the infamous Chapter 5 race, which is one of the stupidest difficulty spikes in a video game, especially for a mandatory section. The fact that the hardest parts of Mafia are driving sections in a third-person shooter is a bit silly, and I found myself soft-locked in several sections due to getting checkpointed on low HP, similar to how you could get spawn killed during Brutal and Uncharted. I don't think this is a bad design in Mafia, because you shouldn't get auto HP regen during a respawn, but it's still very frustrating. Performance-wise, there are some glitches to be found, which is to be expected of Hangar 13 games, and the loading times aren't great, with one such loading time lasting an entire minute, even on PlayStation 5. Overall though, Mafia Definitive is of course well made on a technical level, infusing the DNA of the OG with some updated graphics and refinements that put it up there with Mafia 2 as one of the best open world story-driven games. My opinion changed over the course of playing Mafia Definitive, where I started out thinking the game was annoying and bland and probably deserved a mediocre score. But by the time I completed the Ballad of Tommy Angelo, I felt like Mafia Definitive was much closer to Mafia 2. So I think it's a solid 8 out of 10, good game. Especially when considering it is, after all, a remake of an oldie from 2002. It gave me some perspective that one of my favorite games, Mafia 2, was not a one-off. That the game that sparked the series was in fact just as good as GTA was in those early days, even if it doesn't get the same notice. I always thought if Mafia 2 had been given the same budget by Take-Two as a GTA game did, they could have done a lot more with it. But Mafia 2 was just about all I wanted from a gangster game at the time, and I think the original Mafia made a lot of men glad to be gamers back in 2002 and still in 2020.
That family is our greatest weakness, but it's also our greatest strength.